Good day, everyone. Hi, my name is Nicole Anderson, and I am managing partner of Redsand Ventures. Redsand Ventures focuses on investing and building ventures in the area of sustainability, predominantly financial services, but that's changing fast. I'm delighted today to welcome a very close friend and ally, Sabine VanderLinden. Sabine and I have known each other for a number of years, have hit the fintech and insurtech trail together over probably close to a decade now. We co-edited a book together, the insurtech book, that was an entire summer in 2017. And yeah, so we are strong collaborators. Sabine is CEO and co-founder and managing partner of the Alchemy crew. And it's a delight to have you with us today. Thank you, Sabine.
Thank you, Nicole, for having me. Really delighted to be with you.
And I'm very jealous of your background. It looks like a beautiful, posh apartment in Miami.
Something like that, right? I look for sun.
Oh, absolutely. So Sabine, I want to focus today on a particular theme. Actually, you've coined really, so hats off to you. I think it's a perfect macro theme to engage so many parts of certainly the financial services community in what lies ahead. And the theme is the transition economy. So we did thanks to you, you hosted an amazing event a couple of weeks ago, primarily focused on the insurance industry, talking to this theme specifically. So for the audience, I think it would be super helpful if we could just dive into how do you define the transition economy? Could you provide some context on this and explain to our viewers what you think this means and why it's such an imperative?
Yes, certainly. So when we talk about transition economy, we think about a movement, a change from one state to another. And often we need to look at business models. So one of the common business model which is shifting right now is the fossil fuel model from energy companies, moving to renewable energy, such as wind farms, or transport companies moving gradually from fossil fuel-led cars to renewable vehicle, and particularly electric vehicle, and therefore also autonomous driving. So that's the shift from one state to the other. But one thing I think it's important for us to realize is the transition economy has not just started today. You know, when we talk about innovation, moving from closed operating models or closed innovations to open innovation model, where we invite other partners and ventures to come and collaborate with us to build the business of tomorrow, is a mean to transitioning to something new. It is also around looking at, you know, in insurance, we talk often about our traditional maybe a little bit sometimes old-fashioned business models, and the need to consider new ways of attracting customers and serving customers in the future.
So fantastic, thank you. And I continue to learn from you on the topic, so amazing stuff. So you talked a little bit about, and I think a segue for the next question, which is predominantly, you know, what does transition mean for in terms of sustainable practices? I think, you know, the language and the taxonomy is so confusing. So many definitions and terms are being used interchangeably. But predominantly, I think everyone realizes that it all starts with an ethos base within an organization, the will, the need to perhaps look at organizational structures very differently, as opposed to just relying on the forces outside an organization for change, whether that be policy, regulation, or your own market, you know, demand. So could we just touch on what you're seeing and what you perhaps even recommending as some of the triggers for changes in practices?
So, you know, there are many. And as we were running this event recently, we actually concentrated on four. one of the big trigger is us living in big cities. So the urbanization of big city, people moving from rural areas to mega cities. What we are seeing with the 8.5 billion people who are around the world is that on one side, 68% of us will live in big city in the future, I think by 2030. And at the same time, you also have an elderly population which is trying to live in their homes or live in places which make sense to them. So what is happening is in those mega cities, you have two sets of activities or challenges affecting us. You know, how do you take care for sure of the affluent, but also of the vulnerable, which means that a lot of our government agencies are looking at what smart city means for them. The second area is the one we talk about a lot, climate change, environmental degradation, which is a big theme being addressed now, I think, in finance, but also in insurance. How do we help consumer to be more accountable and responsible with their carbon footprint production? And so therefore, how can we help them offset that carbon footprint is one area. And then when you look at commercial organizations, it's how do we help them mitigate the risks that may be arising from environmental risks, emission risks, safety risks, and the big one would be diversity and inclusion. So when you look at sustainability and transitioning, we have to also look at, for sure, how we produce carbon, CO2 or greenhouse gas, but also how do we create waste? How do we use the water? How do we use plastic in our daily lives? It's why a lot of sectors like fashion, beyond, the one I mentioned, energy, are targeted industry to make change in their processes and the way they do things. Then you have us as users, as business users, scarcity of resources. As we produce a lot, we also are seeing that we need just to be careful as well around the resources we use, particularly in the agricultural sector. And so what you find is that crop tech and how the food production is being produced in the future is going to become even more important as to how we do that with reduced method, for instance, in our lives. And finally, technology. I think when you look at every industry, everyone is using tech to actually move to that transition. So tech is everywhere, but then we need to be more careful of the implications from an ethical, privacy and security viewpoint. And we have seen a lot of articles coming out recently, right, around big tech being named for being maybe a little bit less careful around the way they use people's data.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a day's discussion in and of itself. But, you've mentioned a few things there that really talk very much to our world, which is solutions that are very different, perhaps, to the solutions of old, the role of technology, and really the business models that are being shaped and formed to solve new problems, or perhaps old problems that require different solutions or new solutions. And so business models are different, and they are predicated on technology, which is, not something totally unfamiliar to the world of fintech, right? Technology business models came into their own in fintech. But where we stand as on that kind of arrowhead of innovation. And I'm sure you share my frustration in the fact that private market capital is also at a tipping point. The world of transition requires very different skills in terms of investment capital. You are seeing the convergence of engineering knowledge meets mathematical financial knowledge, meets deep technology knowledge. And this is a big ask for many a capital allocator in private markets. So interesting to see how that changes the VC PE world. But I mean, I'd love your view on the role of private market capital in fostering investment and you know, thoughts, good, bad, indifferent, as to how that can rally around the importance of fueling solutions and at the pace we need it, quite frankly.
Yeah. So when you look at the question around private capital, I guess we are touching two pillars. So when we look at sustainability and transition risk, or the transition economy, we tend to think about it in terms of investing, financing, and insuring. So my strength in insurance means I'm really working with insurers to help them with the insuring part of the equation, understanding emerging risks, and therefore enabling them to start building the product and services of tomorrow. Now, when you look at the capital market, the big interest will be around investing and financing. So financing new projects, such as, you know, new wind farms needs to be financing. It's also about accepting that we cannot finance specific projects. Insurers will not insure coal mining project. Many of them, 35 has actually signed a charter that they will not insure coal mining project any longer, which means, so they are the two opposite, you know, the project can be financed and some which cannot. And in our sector, which is insurance, we actually seeing insurance companies, for example, financing new smart building projects for the elderly, for the young people, to actually utilize and leverage technology to enable people to be more mindful around, for example, their carbon footprints, as an example. On the investing side, we see for the past year, we've seen big banks putting some significant funding behind, you know, green bonds and means to demonstrate that they are aligned with the sustainability agenda. You know, I remember us talking about BlackRock just last year. We were talking about Santander's as well, and many others. We know that there are also many who could probably do better as well as part of that equation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a global evolution. We hope it's a revolution more than evolution, given, you know, time constraints we all appreciate. But fantastic. Ryan, look, I want to cover the topic of transition. Transition assumes change, and with change, you know, there is essentially exposure. So the topic of risk is obviously really right up there on the agenda when you talk about transition at every single level. And, you know, again, we could go on for days just, you know, unpicking every level of risk in by sector, by segment, when it comes to the transition. But, you know, just some thoughts you could leave with the audience in terms of transition and perhaps specifically probably transitional risk. The kind of salient points that I guess everyone should be thinking about and could be thinking about.
Sure. So things people should be thinking about is first around, you know, when I look at my operation, my business, what transition is that business going to go through? You know, the example we've used are very simple example to use, but that also apply to service companies who, because their customers are changing, because, you know, 60% of the future population will be Gen Z and Gen Y, and those guys are very sustainability centric. Because your consumers are changing, you need to change as well. And because corporate customers do not have the choice, they also have to adapt their strategies to become far more mindful of the environment and the emission and the people that are working within their organizations, and how they use diversity to build their business of tomorrow. Everybody's changing. So everybody is going technically through this transition. So every business needs to look at three things: how they are addressing it operationally, internally, how they are actually building, you know, the basic processes and avoiding that people take planes, maybe, you know, I wouldn't say take a car, but maybe take an electric car to go to a meeting. You know, what are the better means to drive impact within the operation? It will be as well around the talent. How can we educate our talent to understand what our business is about, our purpose is around sustainability? I've seen some energy companies actually embedding sustainability metrics now into their reward system for their employees, which I thought was really interesting. Then you need to look at it around your product and services. When you have tangible product and services, it might be easier. Fashion tech, right? Fashion needs to move and use much more renewable sources to build clothes, and they need to make slow tech, right? They need to build, create clothes which last longer. And so you have this shift between this fast tech we were used to, buy a piece of clothes, maybe never wear it, and then throw it away, where now we need to take care of what we own just because it's better for the environment. So what is the product and services of tomorrow going to look like? And because those product and services are likely to use more technology, what are the emerging risks which are literally emerging? So for example, when you look at fossil fuel organizations, so refinery, deciding to reduce their production of fossil fuel in the North Sea, moving to wind farms. You have a new risk, which is a wind farm. I've learned through my research that wind farms actually break more easily. So we have risks happening from using new technology, which means that we need to actually look at risk mitigation techniques to prevent our business to be affected long-term by the potential risk of our service or our products. And finally, value chain. So how our partners and suppliers and customers actually are themselves behaving sustainably, because reputational risks comes to play, and any organization can be affected by one of their partners or one of their customers who pretend to be sustainable and is not. And, as you know, journalists are very good at picking on that. I remember this story, this airline who had planted trees to offset their carbon footprint. And then a journalist went to check out the plantation, and there was only one tree left on that plantation. So therefore, reducing the carbon footprint for one plane. And so this, unfortunately, may be the risks incurred for poorly thought through sustainability strategies. Risk-wise, you will see that there's a lot of risks. We are used to the physical and the liability. Now we have plenty of transition risk coming to play.
Yeah. So where do you think we are in the journey of transition? Right at the beginning, are we just like a little nucleus, or are we, have we kind of flung the nest and a little starling? I mean, where are we in the cycle?
We are very, very early. I love reading this article on the website of the Bank of England, where, they are talking about physical risk and liability risk, and then going into transition risks and realizing, we don't know what we don't know yet. We know that there is a variety of transition risk we need to pay attention to, but we don't even yet have the full frameworks to do that effectively. So, when we talk about emission, how we address greenhouse gas emission will be evolving as businesses transition. When we look at environment, a lot of the environmental work that's been done in insurance, I think, has been around about climate transition. How do we avoid having more earthquake, and how do we avoid droughts or, wildfire? Whilst now we need to start thinking about the waste, the water usage, the spillages, a lot of other areas of environmental risks. So we are very early. And one of the quotes I really like from the Bank of England website is, if government policies were to change in line with the Paris Agreement, 2/3 of the world's fossil fuel reserves could not be burnt any longer. This would change the value of assets held by banks and insurance companies. And what that means is that it's not a small thing. If the government decided that we could not, for example, use diesel for our cars anymore, any asset held in diesel would collapse and would make a lot of big companies uncomfortable out there. So the risks is significant. It will lead to repricing of assets. And I think that is probably the major risks that a lot of companies need to be aware of and prepare for. And so therefore, we are very early on that journey.
So I think before I kind of have the closing question to you, I just wanted to offer you an opportunity to talk about some of the examples in the public domain of companies that have most impressed you with their work in whatever shape or form, you know, in however they've approached the transition agenda and the sustainability agenda, and irrespective of industry. I mean, can you share some examples of some of the companies you think are actually really are the pioneers in terms of transition?
Yeah, so you know the organization which end up, I think, being pioneer in the transition world are companies who actually have created a strategy where it's a long-term strategy, so it's not something which is going to happen overnight, and which realize that it is a combination of things between strategy, leadership, process, governance, and structure around people, but also around technology. And so what I've seen is a lot of those organizations have understood that they need to start looking at technology as an enabler to accelerate their ability to succeed. So when I look at the ecosystem of technology provider, like the climate technology providers, those guys, you know, there are around 14,000 of those ventures already out there, and they already have raised 140 billion during the course of the past year when you start in aggregate looking at what they have done during the past 5-10 years. Then, you know, I spent some time looking at what I call transition, right? Transition tech, which would include your transport, your energy, your agri-tech, you know, smart city players. So I will start with the young players. I've seen, you know, companies such as Stripe, for example, in fintech now developing a climate offering, Stripe Climate, which is aimed to help their client to invest, you know, money, small amount of money into identifying ventures which can actually improve and reduce our carbon footprint. So it's around all carbon removal. Nutmeg as well has been doing some work around social responsibility investing recently, which I thought was interesting. And then you have on the other side, you know, the robotic process automation company like UiPath, which is focusing on humanizing work, but they are trying to do it in a very socially responsible manner, which I thought was interesting to look at. A lot of this new tech we work with also already embedding this internally. When you look at the, I would say the incumbent, the older tech, you have Hosted, which is very well rated in energy for their work. You have the like of Neste as well. In banking, I already mentioned Santander. We have been doing some research in insurance as well. And I would say, you know, looking at it from different sides, you know, Allianz is not doing too bad, you know, AXA and Store Brand. So hopefully we'll be able to share some of analysis in the future around the top 25 insurance companies and how they fare on sustainability. But then you also have, you know, some companies who are, you know, embedded in that ecosystem. So the like of Uplift, which is focused on energy monitoring, Archer, which is focused on electric aircraft. So you have a range of players already coming in who need to find partners and ecosystem partners and ways to operate. But you know, it's a booming market. It's emerging, but hopefully, as we know, things like that can move very fast.
Well, as we've discussed many times, there isn't a segment that isn't in transition. So it is the economy as far as we're concerned, right? And the need to create new market models, one would argue, entire microeconomies at a social level, certainly. But look, it's been a wonderful opportunity to drain your brain, so to speak, and I appreciate the time. I just wanted to end off with one question, which is, you know, always a good way to kind of hit off and close off, which is, what do you think is the biggest risk of lack of pace, one would think, in transitioning? What is the risk of, dear God, let's hope not, doing nothing? So I guess a warning signal is what I'm looking for without being over dramatic, but how can you not be dramatic about something as important about this? So yeah, just some last thoughts on that.
So yeah, I think the warning would be, I mean, don't do anything. Everyone needs to do something. So the risk of doing nothing is a big one. But I like always talking about, you know, these quotes. I was reviewing recently, you know, the study around Fortune 500s. You know, there is a study around looking at the Fortune 500 from 1955. And today, as of 2020, there is only 51% companies still left on the Fortune 500 2020, which were also in the Fortune 500 of 1955, which means that represent 10% of the companies still alive. So there's a risk. Do nothing, and potentially somebody else is going to take pace, win the market, and lead in this fast changing economy.
Fantastic. Well, you know, I think we're all about finding solutions and collecting and connecting those that are brave enough to make some key tough decisions, but there's no way out of making those decisions. And there are solutions out there, and there is capital out there willing to plant the seeds so desperately necessary, whether they come from private markets or public entities. So it's super exciting. We live and breathe the stuff. And look, I just want to say thank you so much again for having the time and the opportunity to share your thoughts and your knowledge. And of course, always going to want to welcome you back, Sabine. This is such a evolving topic. I'm sure we could come back in a few months and have a completely different discussion.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Nicole, for having me, and looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.